Greg, can you explain as you see it the pros, the upsides to a playoff format with multiple AQs versus a playoff format where all the bids would be decided via at-large selection?
No, not for purposes here. There's a lot attributed to me that is not at this moment attributable to me. So our athletics directors met 3 weeks ago, looked at a set of formats. We have interest in some. We're not committed to any particular format. I have over time talked about, hey, let's just have the fill in the blank number best teams. That goes back to 2019, 2020 playoff expansion. I've reiterated that. I think our room has an interest in a different model. We'll see how that conversation manifests itself this week, and we'll look a little bit more deeply at different ideas, which will put me at some point in a better position to answer those questions.
Would you elaborate on, you said our room has interest in a different model?
Different models, yeah. Our athletics director's room in particular went back to early May when we had a meeting where we focused on some different ideas. So we'll bring back some more information for them to take a look at.
Is it a case where you want to present one or several models to your presidents at the end of this? And
I think it's incorrect to simply focus on the college football playoff. At this moment, at least our existence, we've been talking about football scheduling within our own league. I think last year, for example, was a really good experiment. If you go back to last year at this time, I said in the year ahead, we're going to have an expanded playoff. We're going to have an expanded conference. We're going to play an 8-game schedule with those 16 teams. We're going to learn some things. And so we did. But one of the things you learn is you're not going to divorce your regular season schedule from college football playoff selection. In fact, I think there's more of a feeling that regular season scheduling is governed by college football playoff selection. Witness the discontinuation of the series. And this isn't critical of Troy, it's critical of the reality that, hey, you can drop a big series, and it's not going to hurt you come selection time. You have a team that played 4 games against teams with 6-6 records last year that got in. Another team didn't play. Really anybody at the top of its conference was selected in. And it's clear that not losing becomes in many ways more important than beating. The University of Georgia, which 2 of our teams were left out there. Nobody had that kind of quality win. So, and I think you can't just like run down a college football playoff selection idea without thinking about, well, if we play 8 or 9 games, what are the impacts? That's the depth of analysis we're looking at. We also look at, and we'll go through this tomorrow, our whether people want to agree with it or not, that's up to them. We can go through the analytics and show the rigor of our schedule is different than anyone else's, period. And we had a learning session in September at the CFP about strength of schedule. And strength of schedule isn't everything, but it is an important factor. I remember very clearly one of the messages was, if you play the top ranked team and the 130th ranked team, those 2 games average out to 65.5. If you play 65 and 66, they average out to 65.5. And so the advisor said, just as well playing 65 and 66. Here's my problem. But for maybe 2 teams, we don't have 65 or 66, and everybody else has a group. It's 60 and below. That has to be considered by us in making our schedule, the CFP itself, and evaluating selection criteria. And while I'm one voice asking for that kind of clarity and information, that hasn't exactly changed the criteria that now exist or provided clarity.
That marginalizes your other power conference brethren in the ACC and Big 12, in addition to the other conferences. What are your thoughts on that?
There's critics all over the place. So if you actually go back and do the research, that kind of format could cost us positions, depending on the number of teams. I don't see the critics actually digging in to understand that. I don't see the critics actually analyzing, like I just described, how schedules are evaluated. We're trying to find a format to determine whatever number it is, the best teams in college football. And I think where we are right now is we have used a political process inside a room to come to decisions about football. We should be using football information to come to football decisions. Have to be unanimous. We provide a model and then we sit on our hands for a year and a half, 2 years, as opposed to looking at the depth of issues I'm describing about the game and the concerns about regular season scheduling being impacted by what we have right now. We sat on our hands because we had to have unanimity.
A.G. Hines Company. They've been around for over 100 years, selling building materials since anyone can remember. Lehman Jewelers offers more than 90 years of combined craftsman experience and is the leader in appraisals, estate, and custom jewelry. Kindness and integrity are our top values. Located in Turkey Creek and Maryville, Lehman Jewelers is your hometown jeweler of choice. Come experience the difference.
One could say that when we talk about automatic qualifiers, look at the NCAA basketball tournament. If you were to give the ACC a certain amount based off of what was happening a decade ago, they're the strongest conference arguably. Now they are no longer that, at a record low in representation. So why should we be awarding a conference a certain amount of automatic qualifiers for a certain amount of years? Why should we be setting that in stone for several years?
Is that an editorial or a question?
That's been asked by critics, reporters, everybody out there. Lots at stake right now.
Well, I don't know what you're asking. You're
That's
observing.
the question. Do you believe?
Wait, stop. I just asked you.
Do you believe that's fair?
What's the question?
Do you believe that setting out that format for several years, not just for 1 year, for several years, is fair? Having that static 4 automatic qualifiers for a certain amount of period.
Well,
Beyond 1 year is fair.
yeah, your question assumes one variable when I just walked through their other variables.
They
So
change every year.
Well, I let you ask your question, so you can decide whether you want me to answer the question or not. So there's one variable you asked about, right? Which is if you do this. And I began by saying, we're not committed at this point to something. We're interested.
To your point, Greg, in some years, that the model that Brandon's discussing would cost the SEC bids as compared to an at-large only format. Why do you sense that maybe your membership is not more passionately behind the idea of an at-large only format?
Well, in our own room, I've had athletic directors tell me directly that we've given too much away to arrive at these political compromises. We move teams from outside 12 in. And we've spoken about that before, how many of those compromises does it take? Last week, it took us a while to move beyond a model introduced in 21, early 21, when the conference alignments looked much different than they do now. And so part of, I think, the right conversation is about how do you continue to adapt? Football's not a static game, nor should it be. I think the second recognition is things have changed greatly. And part of where we are in basketball is because we have changed as a membership. So both of our new members were selected at large. We've taken 10 years to move from where we were to the preceding 10 years. So there's not like switch flipping that goes on. I think the word hope is at the center too. Like, how do you bring people into the conversation late in the season in this changing environment? And so the idea continues to populate itself out, building interest and giving hope. Whether that's the ultimate destination, we'll see. But to your question, why does it populate itself? Why do people think about it? Even if it costs us something, you could have more teams perhaps involved later in the season through that model.
Greg, in that vein, how much discussion has there been? Again, we're going a hypothetical down the road here, so bear with me. Automatic qualifiers going 1-8 and there being a conference title getting removed. Obviously, how much the league title even means to this league, how serious are that discussion?
We haven't talked through that, so that's not at the top of my points of consideration. You have to be mindful of change, and You know, there's a saying, go slow so you can go fast. I think that gets lost these days. You know, people say, sources say, here's an idea, and all of a sudden we're down a road without thinking through all the elements involved in that decision. So we try to help bring those. We probably don't think of everything ourselves right off the bat, so that's why a little bit of time is helpful.
When do you believe that,
Hang on, I'm gonna go to somebody else.
Does the play-in format in any way dilute the regular season any further? You know, if you're putting in up to 6 teams.
I don't think you can make that an absolute statement. You know, we were having conversations, not necessarily you and I, although we may have. If you go to 12, does that dilute the regular season? I can tell you, I was at the Georgia-Texas game on the field the Georgia-Alabama game. So where were we, week 3? Talking with media members, he said, it just doesn't feel the same. For those of you that was a pretty incredible night. I think everybody competed at the highest level as hard as they could. And we had that over and over. So I think these absolutes on what does or doesn't impact the regular season are kind of older conversations, maybe not completely informed. I will go back though. When people are canceling games because of the CFP selection process, that directly impacts the regular season.
Yeah.
And that's where when I talk about there's a lot more than just one element of these things. I think those are some of the broader list of elements that have to be
If wins and losses is becoming an outsized part of this, does that mean that the selection committee is not doing its job? Is there a lack of faith in the selection committee?
No, I don't think wins and losses are outside because there's two sides to that coin, right? I think there's been so much effort to get to the point of 12 that the continual evaluation of how are we making decisions got pushed in the background. And the way I look at last year, the learning experience was, it used to be the argument about the top 4. That was it. I'm 5th or I'm 6th and I'm angry. Now you had the last year in your head, you have the top 4 with buys. It's a big deal. You have the next 4 that play home games. That's a big deal. You have the next 4 that are in. And then you have the next 4 who are out. And we had raised the issue when we talked back in 21 as a working group about, how do you adapt some of the criteria? I think the only thing we did is pull out conference championships when you have teams on the margin. So how do you look at strength of schedule? What does that mean? We should be able to contextualize that. But that doesn't mean that it's everything. And so that's not going to put you in the playoff. So what's the balance and what's the recognition of rigor that has to be fully considered?
We have an exceptional group of attorneys that work here. We're all trying to be better attorneys, be better advocates for our clients, be better people.
It makes me proud to be part of the team when I see how much the attorneys care about their clients.
It's truly one vision. I feel like every single person who works here has that same vision, and that's to treat all of our clients like family.
We've developed such a tight-knit team. Everyone is unified in being selfless in their representation.
The Garza Law Firm. Let us help.
Local Internet Pro, that's the home of Ty the Internet Guy. Owner Ty Claiborne understands that different homes have different internet needs. Ty acts as a mediator between different cable internet providers and the homeowner while catering to your internet needs. He works with the homeowner from installation through implementation to save you money. Call Ty the Internet Guy, 865-296-0285.
What's the incentive to want to schedule like a Texas at Ohio State when you see that Ole Miss and Alabama, obviously really good teams that didn't get in? Is it going to hurt the fabric to schedule these tough non-conference games out of fear of missing out?
When Texas and Alabama play as a non-conference game, I thought, and people had plenty of opinions, that the selection committee honored the importance of that game. I think it's good for college football to have those kind of games. I generally think people believe that way. But you've seen the dominance of CFP access becoming such a big deal. So if you pivot some access points, perhaps you can not be as threatened by a loss, or is it a reward for a win that becomes
some of these models also set up those non-conference games, which you say you'd like to, or at least hint that you'd like to preserve and make them inconsequential, because there would be no consequence if you lost the loser of the Texas Ohio game. So I wonder, like, is there a balance that has to be thought of? Is like, we'd like to preserve these games, but we also need to preserve the consequences of these games.
I think the first point is we'd like to preserve the games. I think that's one of the problems we're encountering right now. Yeah. And I've heard that. And we even had discussions with LEDs who were thinking about maybe I shouldn't play this game. Like, don't walk away at this point. Well, I think the first point exists now. I don't think you can say they're inconsequential. Again, I think one of the conversations last year when we went to 12 was we had a big game week 3. Well, it doesn't feel the same. So I would just caution about making the observation that won't have the same meaning or same impact. I think those games do have impact. They do have meaning. It may be different from an access point. And that's where I look at some of the weighting of the rhetoric right now that, well, I shouldn't play those games. I'm better off going 11-1, 12-0. I think that's a bigger threat to playing those games than some other model that might be considered.
Is there any anticipation or hope that the House settlement would be approved by now, or there would be a decision, and how does that guide the discussions this weekend?
I've learned a long time ago we don't control the court system. Is there a hope? Is there a thought? Do people say it would be decided at this point? Yes. We have a responsibility for implementation, so does it mean we're going to keep preparing? We're going to keep preparing. We're going to wait to see the judge's final decision on the proposed settlement.
Greg, back on
The more clarity we can have earlier, because clocks are ticking here, the better.
Greg, about the challenges of teams 11-1, 12-0 being compared against teams with more losses. Were you surprised Alabama did not make the playoff last year?
I don't know that I'd say surprised. I think that's one of the realities, but I spoke in July at media days asking how will a 9-3 team, and I used Georgia's really good example given their 3 really difficult road games. How do you evaluate that against other teams that don't come anywhere close to that? And as I said, we learned something the first time through, and that raises the need for deeper analysis and understanding. If we're going to just incentivize wins, playing fewer winning teams can get you to more wins. I don't think that's great for football. I mean, to Ralph's question. So I think the pressures create the need for something to adapt.
Greg, I remember when you were in Nashville Big Ten meetings, you said, to paraphrase you, that this has to really go well and how does it work the first year of the 12-team playoff? Who got left out, who didn't, how it worked, selection committee, did it work out, did it really work as well as you were hoping it was going to?
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to have more teams. I think big picture, we went granular right off the bat, which is, hey, there's this model, how do you respond to this model, what's the reason? So if you take a step back, yeah, it went well. We had 12 teams selected. There's always going to be agreement and disagreement. I think we're late in adjusting the season. I think that could have happened sooner. We've done that for the year ahead. And nobody's asked me about the why of that, so I'd be happy to come back to that. You watch viewership build. I think when you actually looked at actual comparisons, so don't compare a January 1 game to a semifinal a week later, but actually look at the performance of that game relative to other sports properties. I think there's a lot of good there. You never sit back and suggest you've reached a destination. There's always work to be done. But I think big picture, I did say that in Nashville, it has to work. I think it did work, and I think it's still has room for improvement. We all got that on our report cards back.
Greg, do you have
straight seating? When discussing the straight seating with other commissioners, we just kind of brought it up. So, what were those conversations like over the last couple of months, looking at what the last college football playoff was with 12 teams, and then making that decision for a straight seating? Can you take us behind the curtain?
Oh yeah, that's a lot of meetings.
Maybe break it down
the
into
Campbell soup version.
Exactly.
Which is condensed. A Reader's Digest version, I guess. Well, the notion of reseeding or does the allocation of teams. So part of the criticism is, well, this allocation of teams thing is kind of new. It's not, actually. It exists in different formats. You could be outside the top 12 and moved in. We saw that with a team last year. You'd be outside the top 4 and move into the top 4. And when the model was developed, you had a Pac-12 as it was historically constituted. You hadn't had the movement. And so when we went through that research at that time, I think every year but one, those top conference champions were either in the top 4 or proximal to the top 4. Then what happened this year is we were down the scale pretty far. We're pulling people out of the top 8 into the top 4. And that wasn't the expectation. So we identified that. That's one. We asked as a group, what might the brackets look like? And you have one sample size, 1 year of real life. There are financial implications because there was a financial award for having received a bye. You had a payment for the first round, second round. Could the math be adjusted there so that people didn't lose in 25? There were efforts to say, well, we won't vote for the 25 season if we don't have guarantees for 26. You know, my position was if it's about kind of straight seeding based on the ranking, so we'll keep allocations involved, that I'd commit to 26 and beyond if people were ready to do so. And then there was a point at which, because you needed unanimity to make the change this year, look, we're going to have to vote at some point. And when we did vote, it was a unanimous vote to make the change. And I think you look at the acceptance of the straight seeding model is one. What I said, I'll be very clear, that in the current alignments and in the current playoff, it becomes very difficult to say, well, if you're Texas and you're in the 3, why are you the 5? And if you're a Tennessee that earned a home game based on the rankings, why are you displaced to a road game? And that becomes much harder to defend than it looked like it would be in 21. Is that enough behind the curtain?
No, that was enough behind the curtain. Yeah.
The variables, if they change on the 8 or 9 game schedule, any variables kind of grow in prominence on what y'all decide this week on that?
I think the CFP selection process has become a much bigger deal after one. Yeah, I think that one, and again, if you go back, since John was kind enough to quote me last year, you can double check. I said, CFP selection, we're going to go through this 16 team, 8 game, first time. We have schools that think about bowl games primarily in that, but the questions about the selection process, not criticism of the committee, but criteria and process are meaningful. You've seen some say we should go back to the old way of BCS. And, is there some kind of in between human and machines that can inform? We've got analytics. I'm just going to stay in retirees quarter because at some point, I've read press announcements on you guys and you keep showing